Okay, so chapter two uh, covers psychological experiments. And in your textbook, there's going to be a lot of review from Gen Psych. For your video lecture quiz, we're going to watch a video on psychological experiments, but I want to give you a little bit of an intro. So this video is just going to be an intro for the video that you're going to watch for your quiz. So, for the psychological experiments, in the past, we have not always been very good. We haven't always taken care of our subjects. There have been times that people have participated in psychological experiments and that they've come out a little bit psychologically damaged. There have been studies in the past where the people who were doing the experiment perhaps did not take a look at what might happen. For example, with Pavlov, and I'm sure you've heard of Pavlov's dogs. And in Gen Psych, I'm sure they talked about how he cut holes in the sides of the dog's cheeks so he could measure how much saliva was dripping out of their cheeks. And some of that stuff still happens. I mean, today, if you take a look at some of the experiments that happen, with animals when they're testing for makeup or they're testing to see if, if things are, well, there's still tests that happen with animals, but with psychological testing, we really try not to hurt and harm people and animals anymore. And if there is any harm, there has to be a really, really, really good reason. And it has to go through all kinds of boards and people to approve it before we do it. But there was a time that that wasn't the case. And today we're going to talk about some of those studies that are really, really famous, but that we may have caused some harm to people. And the video that you're going to watch is going to talk about 5 famous studies. And you should have heard about all these in Gen Psych. I don't know if you spent a lot of time talking about the kind of dark side of them, but it is important that you know, and it is psychological research. So we're going to spend some time talking about it. So, what is the Belmont Report? And this is one of the things that I want you to know. The Belmont Report came out in the 70s, and basically what it was is around that time, a bunch of psychologists got together and they said, whoa, we really shouldn't be harming people the way that we have been. And it was written by the National Commission for Protection of Human Services of Biomedical and Behavioral Research. And they kind of got together and took a look at some of the things that had been happening, including Little Albert, which I hope that you heard about that in Gen Psych, and paused for a second and thought, oh my goodness, he was abusing that child. Or if you heard about, well, we'll go through the studies. I don't want to give them all away yet. Um, so in the 70s, thank goodness, they took a look and they thought, wow, we really should put some things down. So they put down some criteria and some rules, and that is the Belmont Report. And we still have that today. So we're going to talk about that. Okay, so what is the Belmont Report mean? What specific rules? Well, there's basically 3 things that came out of it. The first one is respect for persons. And what that is that really anyone who participates, we should be giving them informed consent. In other words, we should be telling them what are the possible good things that could come out of this study and what are the possible consequences or the possible things that might happen that they wouldn't enjoy. So, when you're doing a study, and if any of you go on to graduate school, in psychology, you probably will have to do a study, and you'll have to, write a big paper on it. It's lots of fun. Um, you're not going to tell them specifically what's going to happen, but you would have to tell them that, the possible things that they wouldn't enjoy or the possible negative things that might happen. So you need to have them be informed and you need to give them the option at any point to quit or to say that they don't want to participate anymore. You can't force people to continue if they don't want to. So the first is respect for persons. The second is that we really should not have a negative impact. So whatever we do, we really try to have no harm. The study that there should be, yeah, but do no harm. And the third thing is we should try to make sure that subjects aren't exploited, because what was happening before 1970 is the typical subject um, tended to be poor. They really like to take people from orphanages or the homeless, and then they would do this research, and then the people that would benefit from the research were the wealthy. So if we wanted to know how this new drug would impact people, well, let's try it on people um, that don't have family or don't have people that will notice if they die, and then the people that will benefit will be the rich people. And that's really I mean, yeah, obviously, I mean, that's exploiting people. So now it has to be fair. So that's what the Belmont, I mean, these are the very basics of what it says. So there's lots of different studies, but these studies, and the reason I like them is these are 5 studies that you should have gone over in Gen Psych. If you had Gen Psych with me, we touched on them. So first would be Little Albert, and you should have Little Albert, and that was with classical conditioning. So that's a good review for classical conditioning, because there are a few there. You probably will run into a few multiple choice questions for your chapter quiz on classical conditioning, because remember, there's operant conditioning and there's classical conditioning. Those are the two biggies. So that will be a good review for you for that. There's the monster study. And that is with Wendell Johnson and Mary Tudor. And that one, if you remember, they took kids, that was the 1930s or so, and they took kids from an orphanage, and they took this group of kids and then they split them in half. That part's good. I mean, you have a control group and an experimental group. But then they took the experimental group and they told them, and both groups had some stuttering issues. So they told the experimental group that they really shouldn't say anything until they can say it perfectly. So they gave them some self-esteem issues, and that impacted their lives. So to the point that they actually refer to this study now as the monster study. That's not what it was called back then, but that's what it's called now. It was that bad. Um, Stanley Milgram and obedience. You should have heard about that. That is the study, if you recall. That's the one where people thought that they were shocking other people. So that's the one that we talk about. Would you would you ever hurt somebody else? Would you shock somebody else? And a lot of people say no. I mean, what if I told you to do something? Would you do it if somebody in authority, not that I consider myself an authority, but if somebody in authority told you to do something, would you do it? Um, and that was Stanley Milgram at that time. He was wondering why people do things, and this was after World War II, why people do things because somebody tells them to do it. So that was obedience studies. And the issue with that is people left that study thinking that they possibly killed somebody, but definitely hurt somebody. So definitely issues there. The bystander effect, another big one, and that one, well, I'll let you hear about that one. And then the Stanford Prison Experiment, another very important study. So I'm going to go over those 5 experiments. And the reason I think this ties in really nicely is because this chapter, one of our learning goals is to talk about psychological research. So this way we're going to go over psychological research, but I want you to hear about these studies and pay a lot of attention to how they set things up, some of the mistakes they made, and also some interesting things that were learned in these studies. So, what do you do now? Well, I have a couple suggestions. So this is the first time that you're doing a video lecture quiz in this way. The first one that you did was me giving you a lecture, and then you did, a sort of an essay type. For these video lecture quizzes, what you're going to do is you're going to watch the video and then you're going to answer the questions. couple suggestions. One, I suggest when you watch the video, you put the closed captioning on. It is so much easier if you read along while you're watching the video. Suggest you take notes. You don't have to, but it does help people. If you're the type of person that you kind of like to write things out, then um, studies do show that writing does help get things in your brain. So I know it sounds a little bit old school, but it really does help right, left brain get things in. So what you're going to do is you're going to start the quiz. And when you start the quiz, the very first question that comes up, it's called a text question, and it is the video. So you're going to watch the video. You can watch it as many times as you like. And there are questions that you will answer, and most of them are multiple choice. They're easy. You should find this, I hope, to be, and I don't want to say enjoyable because we're watching some kind of dark experiments, but I hope you find it interesting. So now you can watch that video, and that will be your video lecture quiz for chapter 2. Let me know if you have any questions, and I hope you guys are having a great week.